about this Patanjali's second sutra, which then, for example, I would translate yoga is the suspension or cessation of the movements or fluctuations of consciousness. And then was it what was the name of the breathing that you, Susanne, said that this falling asleep?
Coherent
breathing. So this, what happens in yoga, of course, is very similar to the falling of sleep, because also in yoga, of course, we try to withdraw from most of our movements, and we, for example, asana, which is, of course, a highly important word in yoga, which normally people understand as all these postures of different yoga postures. But it's important to remember that asana etymologically means sitting down, and to sit down, being seated from the root of as. So we could kind of say that it reminds of the word ass in Finnish, in English. So remember, just place your ass in the cushion, and then you are in asana. And so original yoga asanas were all sitting postures, and only later, little by little, there started to come all these kind of other kind of postures.
During Patanjali's day, it was only the seated posture meditation, because all that they were practicing at that time was meditation. And then later, around the, we first have it around that time, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, that, people were practicing only sort of seated or on the floor postures to prep for meditation. Still, the postures were preparing for meditation, and all of them, there's no standing postures in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which I think was around the 16th century.
And especially nothing like what Ashtanga yoga brings it to this kind of acrobatic stage of doing yoga. So yeah, this is very important to remember. And in that kind of sense, yoga, this how Patanjali describes yoga as cessation or stoppage or withdrawal from the fluctuations or movements of the mind or consciousness. Here it is important to remember that in this word citta, that then is translated as consciousness or mind, this includes, for example, our perceptual relation with the world, how our mind interprets the objects and so on. So if we follow the 8 limbs or the 8 stages of yoga, from first yamas and then niyamas and then asana, then comes pranayama, then pratyahara, and then dharana, and then dhyana and samadhi. So when there is a natural process of this, that actually these 8 limbs or 8 stages of yoga, they take us or the practitioner straight to that how Patanjali describes yoga as a stoppage or cessation of the mind or the fluctuations of consciousness. Because, for example, when we sit down and we go to the asana as a sitting posture, we already stop most of this kind of consciousness towards the world in our practical life and our social life and so on. We stay in one place, like when we're falling asleep, we stay in one place in certain kind of posture of non-movement. Then comes pranayama, which is...
That seems like such an important aspect to say that, most of the time, most of these breath practices are where we're sitting and we're still. I mean, there are movement practices related to yoga, to breath, obviously moving yoga with the breath, but it actually, one of the reasons I don't do those like acrobatic yoga postures anymore is that it's very difficult to focus on breathing and do something so physically difficult. So I don't actually care to practice those things, because to me it is about linking breath to movement. So most of the things that I do are more more simple, because in those I can experience my breath. It's very difficult to, I mean, obviously if you're running or doing something like that where you're just super focused on the breath, but you generally, it seems like those movements where you become still are where the breath, you can really tune into that subtle experience of breath.
Yeah. But here it's important now to make this distinction between Patanjali's yoga as yoking or uniting and connecting with some kind of is it then Brahman or the God, or Ishvara, another way of describing the God, or Purusa, or how it is, what kind of words or concepts Patanjali is using in the Yoga Sutras. And then to make a distinction between that original Patanjali Yoga Sutras and then how yoga has been understood later, because they are kind of connected, but they are different in a sense that, as you said yourself, original yoga was just sitting postures, as asana, the word itself says. So people are used to this word of yoga, but actually, as we all know, there are many different kind of yogas. And then if I keep myself now for a moment only in the Patanjali version of the Yoga Sutras, so then if I explain how these every step or every limb or every stage takes us a little bit further into that, how Patanjali already describes yoga in that second sutra of the yoga, of that yoga is cessation of the fluctuations or movements of the consciousness. So first we stop all our movement and sit. Then comes the breath practices of pranayama. And this is important here, is that when pranayama is understood as control of the breath, or then it's another way of understanding what pranayama means is expansion of the breath. And then what control of the breath it can mean, in my interpretation, it can mean two different things, two different kind of controls. Either we control the breath in a certain way, or another way, which I find very interesting way to interpret what breath control actually could mean, is that we control with the breath our whole being, all these other movements of the consciousness, that it's actually the breath that controls our whole way of being, and that would be breath control. So that, and then it would be connected to the expansion of the breath, that the breath starts to expand itself to all levels and dimensions of our existence, and that then changes completely the quality of our being.
So that